Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Wargamer podcast. Yes, it's the Canadian Wargamer podcast featuring two affable and youngish granddads, Mike and James, talking about primarily miniature war games and the occasional hex and counter excursion from Mike from our unique perspective in the Great White North. And as the strains of La Foy d'Arable die away, here are your hosts, Mike and James. Hey folks, welcome to the Canadian Wargamer podcast, episode 20 with me, Mike.
And I'm James.
Hey James, how are you?
Oh, we're all right now.
Yeah, here we are, episode 20, a year and a bit into it. And it's funny, I got an email today from one of our listeners, Di in Vancouver, not Vancouver, further south, California. Sorry about that, mate. And he said he liked the podcast, but he said that yours truly sounded a bit down in the dumps. And I'm hoping I'm a little more upbeat tonight.
Once you get used to the new job and everything.
Yeah, and there was, I think we were kind of frank that there was a bit of, there was some mental health stuff going on my part. But anyway, we're back and I'm feeling much happier. And one of the reasons I'm feeling happier tonight is we have a guest this time. So our listeners are not going to just be subjected to you and I nattering.
Oh, come on. We are fascinating.
Well, we are fascinating, but our
endlessly amusing.
Endlessly amusing. Our guest is equally fascinating. So tonight we have the doyen of Canadian Napoleonic Wargaming, Glenn Pearce. Glenn, hello.
Hi, Glenn.
Hello, Michael.
I called you a doyen.
How are you guys?
Good. We're glad you're with us. I called you a doyen, and I'm honestly vaguely unsure what a doyen is. It's kind of like a dean or something, like the help me out, James. What is a doyen? So like a doily?
No.
No.
If I'm recalling correctly, I'm going to have to look it up on the Oxford English Dictionary.
It just sounds very distinctive.
I think a doyen is a society lady who holds.
Oh, okay. Scratch that.
Who holds a great deal of influence.
All right. Okay. Well, let's take two. We have tonight on the show an elk. Sorry. Take three. Glenn Pearce, Toronto Wargaming Society, Napoleonic celebrity in Canadian wargaming circles. Glenn, lovely of you to be on the podcast tonight.
My pleasure. I'm certainly glad to be here.
Yeah, and this is your second appearance because we had you on in the early fall talking with Jim Ozarski and the other guy, the other American guy, whose name I can't quite remember right now, from Anything But a One. And we were talking about Napoleonic rules, and it was lovely to have your voice as part of that. But now we have you all to ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're excited. You are a veteran. You are definitely a grognard. As far as if there are Canadian grognards, you are a grognard. Tell us about your wargaming bio, Glenn.
Figures. That end of it. Before that, I did a lot of board gaming, and figures kind of fascinated me, and I started buying some Airfix, solo, of course, because there was no one I knew who wargamed.
And how old were you when you were doing this?
Yeah, how old would you have been?
I was in my late 20s.
Oh, okay. That late.
So
yes.
A late bloomer.
Yeah. And it was probably in the late 70s.
Okay.
So there were no real wargaming clubs per se that I knew of.
Hmm.
There was no way to really contact anybody.
Yes, yes.
I just stumbled across some magazines, if you want to call them that. They were more like typewritten notes that were circulated as a magazine of some type.
Mhm.
And in it, it mentioned people in England and one person here, Professor Donald Degree, who I believe was a teacher out of Guelph University.
Okay.
And he was friends with a number of the well-known celebrities in England. Names escape me at the moment, but everybody knows them except me. So anyway,
I mean,
tracked,
people like Peter Young and that generation.
yeah, Peter Young and even more famous than him.
Charles Grant, Don Featherstone.
Both of them, yeah, he knew them all.
Well, back
Well-
then, if you made the effort to write, these guys would write back because they wanted, just like us, they wanted to share their passion.
Yeah, just then, yeah, they were all enthusiastic, and Donald was the only one locally, so I managed to track him down and visit him one day, and he had a game set up in his dining room actually,
Mhm.
and the figures were there and all that, and I was fascinated, and he gave me a copy of his rules, which were typed, just a sheet of on two sides, and that was it. He said it didn't have anything formal, and you could understand the charts and that, which I could. So I took them away and thought that was interesting, but I still had no one to play with. So I managed to hook up with the Ontario Model Soldiers Society,
Okay.
who at the time was the only people I knew who had figures, even though I was aware they didn't war game with them, they just used them for display. And so I wrote them a letter and asked if there anyone war gamed and if they could put me in touch with them. 2 years later, the fellow contacted me and said, "I got this letter here. I'm the new president, and there's this letter from you, and I wondered if anybody answered it." And I said, "No." So he hooked me up with a guy in the Beaches, and he was running a little club out of his basement, and he started this club, and they were ancient players.
Okay.
And the scale at the time was 25 millimeters. 30 millimeter figures were in vogue, but then they kind of waned and 25 took over. 20s and 40s had flopped around, but never really grabbed hold apparently, and 25s were things to go. But anyway, he had the ancients going, but when I met him, what happened was his son had met a fellow in university at the U of T, and he was a Napoleonic enthusiast. And so they flipped the club from being agents to being Napoleonics.
Those darn youngsters causing trouble.
Yeah, I guess, well, the ancient players kind of faded away, so I guess they had, the father had no choice. He was now a junior voice, but he had the table, he had the place, so they used it. So anyway, it was an interesting group. They were called the Marshallette, kind of a different kind of name.
Mm-hmm.
And the rules they were using were made up by themselves. And I was given a binder, a 3-ring binder, and that was the rules. The interesting thing about it, though, is every game or every so often they'd make changes, of course.
Yeah.
And you'd get handed your notes to fill into your binder. Well, if you missed the meeting when the notes was given out, you weren't always aware that there were notes that were given out. So everybody's binder was kind of incomplete. So anyway, we struggled through that, and the group only met once a month, And other players like myself were more anxious to play more often. And by that time, I'd set up a table at my place. And so I said, look, I don't have much to do through the week. So maybe if you guys want to meet, you can come to my place on Tuesdays and Thursdays every week if you want. So a couple of guys did that. Next thing you knew, a lot of the guys were coming. The group wasn't that big. There was maybe 7 or 8 of us altogether.
Not a bad group.
Which was still sizable for that time.
Yeah.
And so it came along that we discovered 6mm. And that would be in the late 70s. And the first ones were Heroic and Ross.
Right.
In fact, they were the only one as far as we knew.
Yeah, that was pretty groundbreaking stuff.
But we had hit a wall with our group, and that is we had a very large collection of 25mm figures. All of us had maybe a couple of thousand of them. So, and our table was 12 feet by 8 feet. So it was 3 4x8 sheets. But we found with that, we had no room anymore. For our big battles, our units were 36 figures.
Yeah.
So when you spread out just even a battalion, you're looking at a couple of feet. So the table got ate up real quick. And so we hit the wall as far as maneuver went or having really big units.
Mm-hmm.
So the first solution we had was to gear down our units. First, we said we'll use double lines instead of single lines, which shrunk things in half, but still didn't solve the problem. Then we reduced our units down to 12-figure battalions. And that seemed okay at first, but again, that just allowed us to put more of our figures on the table that we couldn't put on before. So we hit the same wall. So when we saw the 6mm figures, there were 2 of us at the time, we both turned to ourselves and we said, flanks. So we realized that 6mm was a practical solution to the difficulty of flanks and table size. So 3 of us started with 6mm and we slowly built our armies. The other guys were not interested. And then after time, more of the guys became interested because they liked the idea that they could play the big battles on a reasonable sized table. Didn't always have to play them on our normal game table. So the club came kind of to a point where who wanted to play 6 and who wanted to play 25.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority wanted to play 6. And the 25 guys didn't want to play 6 at all. So we had a split, and the 25mm guys, as far as we know, gradually phased out. The 6mm group gradually grew. So that set the stage for our club, and we used to meet every Tuesday and Thursday and every second Sunday. So we got in all kinds of games.
Yeah. 10 games a week.
Yep. So
or a month. Sorry.
What we do is probably on the Monday, we'd sort out something in a campaign kind of sense. And then we'd decide that we had a battle. And then on the Thursday, we'd set it all up. And then we'd come on the Sunday and play it.
Ah.
And then if it was too long, which a lot of them were, then we'd finish it out on the Tuesday or the Thursday. And then start again. So that worked. But then we realized that that was kind of cumbersome. And some people who were there on the one day weren't there the next day, especially if they were losing.
Funny how that works.
Eventually come back is just
Yeah, there was no draw.
Yeah.
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 So we started looking at ways and means to speed up games. And one of the things we realized was having small units that break up just wasn't working. It took too long to change formation. Our turns were about 20 to 25 minutes. And most of that was being taken up by changing formation,
Hmm.
or just trying to literally move the volume of figures around. So we also started reading more and became more evolved in how things worked historically.
Mhm.
And we began to realize that Napoleonic warfare, in the view of most scholars, was not involved in playing rock, paper, scissors with your figures on the table. And battalions changing formation was not really a main theme or a staple of Napoleonic warfare. Battalions didn't move by themselves. They moved in brigades. Brigades set up the formation, and the battalions maintained the formation of the brigade. And of course, commanders had the right to change their battalion in cases of emergency, but other than that, they were supposed to maintain the same physical outlay that was dictated to them by the brigadier, who in turn got his orders from the divisional general, etc.
Mhm.
So the fluidity that we had traditionally seen in our games were what we call, or some others as well, shotgun games, where every battalion is for itself from the word go. This battalion goes this way, this battalion goes that way. He changes formation because cavalry's approaching. The cavalry's only approaching because he knows under the rules that if you're not in square, you're dog meat. So the cavalry, rather than act accordingly like it did on a normal Napoleonic battlefield, it simply sneaks around the field trying to jump on battalions that aren't in line or aren't in square.
Mhm.
So the games we were playing and we thought were realistic were kind of self-made up games. And the vast majority of the rules that were on the marketplace all supported that theory,
Yeah.
and still do today, actually. And it just, after our readings, that this didn't jive with our view of how Napoleonic warfare really played out.
Hmm.
Battalions didn't change formation very often. In fact, they're usually the formation they arrived on the field was the one they stayed with throughout the battle. And other than you see major changes, like in Waterloo, for instance, where the British fall back and form in the square. And that's all of them. The brigades, division, the whole group falls back and forms in the square because they expect a mass cavalry attack. But again, that's not an individual choice by those battalion commanders. That comes down from above. Everybody falls back and forms in the square.
Mhm. Yeah.
So once we got that off our chest, our games moved faster, and we only organized our battalions onto a single base. And so we did away with changing formation, and we played that for a while. But the problem we still had was trying to figure out what was a reasonable base size for 6mm. And at that point in time, we stumbled across Baccus 6mm,
Right.
who would kind of seem to be evolving the same way we did, only they have reached their goals faster. And they had figured out that the best standard size for 6mm figures was a 60mm by 30mm base. And that evolved from how they produced the figures. They produced them in 20mm strips.
Right.
So 3 of them or 6 of them on a base, you got a unit that looks like a battalion. It's ironically a similar size to what the 25s are using. They were using also 25 or 24. They were using 24 figures on a base as well in some areas. And so now Baccus had figured out using 24 figures on a single base for a battalion, and you do away with the nuances of changing formations. But they also were clever enough to insert in their rules that it was assumed that the command was there. So if in fact infantry was attacked by cavalry, the infantry was automatically assumed to be in square, under like conventional rules where you actually had to physically have your figures in square, otherwise you weren't in square.
Mhm.
And that did away with all the nonsense of changing formations and slowing our games down. So we actually were able to compress our turns down to about 10 minutes a turn.
Wow, that's pretty good.
It was a tremendous evolution once you got away, because every turn what you were doing was you sat back and you had to figure out every one of your units, were you in the best formation or not, for the possible scenario against every other unit the enemy had to attack you. So you spent all your time analyzing and trying to project what the next moves were of everybody under your control and everybody that could attack you under your control. And then when you finally got that sorted out, then you had to actually move your figures, and how are you going to end up your move where you're going to be vulnerable again. So the whole game was being bogged down by all these idiotic kind of what can they do or what won't they do, and it was just tremendous how the games changed from being slow and dull, and you sit there. I remember being in a convention once. We went out and had lunch while the other side moved.
Oh, wow.
Now it was a big game, of course, but
Yeah.
but that just showed how bad things were in at that time.
You know,
So-
it often amazes me how many players, including myself, have put up with dull games for years,
Yes.
thinking that, you know, it would get better at some point, but you know,
Yeah,
like,
we stuck with the hobby,
yeah,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, it says something about, I don't know, our our fanaticism, I guess. Glenn,
I
I wanted to
remember-
go back for just a second to, I'm really fascinated by the fact that your group, at least most of your group, made it a really important decision to go from 25 mil to 6 mil, because that's a pretty significant decision. And you mentioned that at that time, was it just Heroics and Ross that was doing?
No, by that time, irregulars had shown up. They were
Okay.
also doing 6.
Yeah.
And I think even Adler had shown up.
Okay. Yeah.
But Adler was rare. It wasn't that well known. A lot of people weren't aware of it.
Yeah.
And then Baccus showed up and slowly dominated the scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
Baccus has grown. Traditionally, most of those companies are just a couple of people running them.
Right.
or just one. Yeah.
Baccus now has 4 machines running all day,
Wow.
and the staff collectively is probably about 7 regulars, and he has other occasionals who help in molding and other areas. So it's turned into a nice little shop that he's got going there.
Yeah. And in fact, they were so busy during the pandemic that they were restricting the size of their orders, weren't they?
Yes.
It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, and like I do remember from the pages of War Games Digest when I was a young lad in the late 70s. Yeah, that GHQ micro armor and 6mm was the hot new thing. But then there was also this 15mm stuff coming on the scene, and you guys just kind of went right by the 15s into 6.
Well, at the time,
move.
you're right. That was our big dilemma. We knew 25s weren't workable. We knew 6s were, but we looked at 15s and we said, 15s is a nice size. So we did start out painting some 15s, and then we realized the 15s took almost as long to paint as the 25s.
Mm-hmm.
And so we weren't gaining much in painting time, whereas the 6s, you can knock those suckers off, in an evening. You could make a battalion or something. And
Yeah,
so it's like
especially
night
when
and
you're
day.
especially when you're looking at going from I've got my collection of thousands of 25mm, and I'm trying to replace that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's a huge you know, time investment
Yes.
that you're trying to, you know, get over.
And that's why some of the group guys didn't join us,
Mhm.
because they had so much invested and didn't want to change scales, they didn't want to get into new problems. But we saw it collectively as the only way practically forward. If you wanted to improve your game and play bigger games and get more out of the hobby altogether.
Mhm.
And in fact, the irony of it is, I'm just this year selling off my 25s. They've been sitting in the basement for years. Our original thoughts were we'd play the big battles with 6mm and we'd play the small battles with 25mm.
Yeah.
But everybody, once they got involved in the 6s, didn't want to go back to the 25s. They just said, you got to lug these things around. Like, we used to play games with a few other groups, and you had to pack up your figures in the boxes, load
Yeah.
them up into vans, unload them out of the vans, out of the boxes, set up on the tables, and then the day, by the time you got them set up, it was noon. You played for a few hours, realized you couldn't finish the game. You made an agreement who won and who lost. You packed them all up and went home.
Yeah.
So, you know, you weren't really gaming anyway. All you're doing is moving, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Goes back to my point about why did we persist for so long doing this?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. But in all fairness, it depends on where your goals are. If
Sure.
your goals is to play small battles, 25s is pretty damn good.
Yes.
But if your goal is you want to play major battles, it's not a very recommendable size. I mean, look at those guys not that long ago who replayed Waterloo. They rented a huge hall, had hundreds of people, thousands and thousands of figures. Took them days and days to set it up.
Yeah.
You know, is that how you play big games in 25? That's not for me.
No.
Yeah.
And
And I remember from, you know, when I was a young lad, there was an article in War Games Digest again, and it was this group that did the Battle of Leipzig with like 25mm, or there might have been Airfix figures. And yeah, they rented a school gymnasium for a weekend. And
Yeah.
there was like this overhead shot from the bleachers, and there's like Leipzig in the middle, and the roads coming out, you know, from the center court, and they're moved, you know, these guys are walking around moving, you know. But I think they're doing like moving battalions around, and in this
Mhm.
very old school game. And I was like, oh wow, I was like, you know, that was so aspirational to me to be able to do that. And I
Yeah,
realized just ridiculous.
Yeah, we played in a gym floor once, and that was it. Never again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the guys, Tom Castaños and his friends on the Joy of Six podcast were talking about how, you know, that even not even high school gym wargaming, but just garage wargaming, right? Like where you get together with 5 or 6 friends and you're going to spend a whole weekend, you know, fighting some giant battle. You know, that's cool when you're in your 20s.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, the idea now that I've just turned 60 of being in a gymnasium full of sweaty wargamers for a weekend, I don't think I would physically endure it or mentally endure it, right? So
No.
there's a lot to be said for the smaller battle or the faster battle as we get older, the smaller scale and the shorter time scale, like the
Yeah.
actual physical time of playing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
something
meet
where
at, I don't know if you remember, Michael, we meet at 9 o'clock in the morning,
Yes.
and we break for lunch, and we close it down at 4 o'clock.
Yep.
And in most cases, the game is over, or you can clearly see which side is going to win in the next couple of turns. So there's no
Yeah.
point in carrying on.
Yeah, I remember, Glenn, and I was gutted that I couldn't come down this summer. It was that it was ironically, it was, you know, 6 days into me having COVID and I was still testing positive, but I felt pretty good. But I just didn't feel in good conscience I could come down there. But I do remember your setup in your basement. It's great.
Now, do you set the game up like Friday night, or, you know, do you set the game up beforehand so everything's in place and you can just like
Yeah.
hand people their briefings and say, right, there's your division, there's your core,
Yeah.
go?
Yeah. Everything's set up. The table's set up. I take my time because I don't always have all that much time to do it. So like we just finished the game on this Sunday. So the next game is going to be in December sometime. So I got a month. First, I evaluate how many players are coming, and then I try to find a game that will accommodate that number of players. Because if the game is too big and there's not enough players, then it gets bogged down the same way it used to be.
Right.
There's too much movement for not enough players. So I try and balance the battle we're going to fight with the number of players we have. And that way they usually do end around 4 o'clock. The game we fought this Sunday was over at actually right at 4 o'clock.
That was the, I'm just looking at your Facebook page, Glenn. That was the Medina de Rio Seco game.
Yes.
Yeah. From the Peninsular War. Yeah. That's just a straight up French-Spanish fight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who won?
The French did, as they did historically. But we wanted a different way than they did historically. Historically, the Spanish were split on 2 separate hills, and the French just went down the center and smashed them. Because there was a mile between the 2 armies. So, but we did it differently. We knew that the Spanish would try to fill that void, which they did. But in doing so, they left both their wings open. So we just attacked the wing that looked the weakest and took it out.
Well, yeah, the Spanish were certainly, let down by some pretty bad generalship.
Yes.
But, if you can pull off a win with the Spanish, I think you get extra bragging rights.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, there's potential. We played it. That's the 3rd time we played it. I think the Spanish did win once.
Oh, very good.
But I don't remember who did it or what the circumstances were because it's so long ago.
Yeah. James and I were talking in the last podcast about our friend in Ireland, Conrad Kinch, who gave a paper recently about, it was called +3 if surprised or Spanish. And he was talking about national characteristics in the Napoleonic period and how you model them and why it is that everybody just sort of thinks the Spanish are a terrible, terrible army. And yeah, they weren't that great in some individual battles, but I think he made the point that it's hard to find a more resilient army. Like the Spanish never gave up. Like they,
Yes.
So it's one of those armies where it might actually be better fighting in a campaign than fighting in a battle.
Yeah, and they did, and they did have a few wins too.
Yeah.
I mean, Balin most famously, but I think oh God, the names escape me. They had another couple of wins.
Yes.
As well.
The Spanish definitely had some crack troops. There's no question about it. And that's again, we're dealing with a lot of wargaming myths. That started out, I don't know where it came from, but even today a lot of rules contain national characteristics, and the Spanish are blackballed as well as some others they're always as being poor troops, and it's just not true.
Yeah, that's why I like rules that move the emphasis to the command and control.
Yep.
Where that's where the French and then the later the remodeled Prussian army do well because they've got good command and control and very flexible. Whereas your Austrians are, they're solid soldiers.
Yes.
But just let down by some bad generals who are just, don't know what's going on. They don't know how to get the intelligence. They don't know how to send out effective orders. Well,
the problems with the Austrians and the order system was before they moved into the corps system, the orders were written the night before by the commander-in-chief for every battalion.
Yeah.
And those orders were then passed down through the chain of command. And so when the shit hit the fan, the commanders of those battalions had nothing to fall back on. They had their orders. They had no incentive or anything else, didn't know what to do unless someone came down and told them to do something different, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, I'm just reading, I'm halfway through John Gill's Thunder on the Danube trilogy.
Hey, wait a minute. I think I got that on my list here, maybe.
Oh, well, there we go. We'll both recommend it.
I know that I got the book. I don't know if that's in my pile, but I know I got it. Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah, and he talks about how there's like a Austrian corps commander who's there's a situation he could take initiative but he defers to the staff officer that's just ridden up.
Yeah.
And like these guys are just doing so much butt covering.
Yes.
Because they didn't have the, unlike, Napoleon, who he would rip a strip off a guy who got himself into trouble. But if you took the initiative and you did well, you're suddenly a count.
Yes.
You're made a marshal, right? So it's
Yep.
it might pay off, and I get the big reward, or the emperor's mad at me and he'll forget, but he'll forget about that in a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it encouraged them to be bold.
Mm-hmm. That's right. You do well tomorrow, and wake up the next day and you're the king of Naples or something. It's like, woo.
Yeah.
Plus, you can't undersell the fact that the French had been at war since the Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So these are all seasoned soldiers, seasoned commanders. They're not new at this game. Whereas the Austrians, what year is it? Okay, we're at war this year. We haven't been at war for 3 years, and the commanders are still the same, but a lot of the other guys are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they didn't have that culture within the regiments and everything, where John Gill talking about like French battalions of conscripts. Like, these guys are new. They aren't the veterans of 1806 and 1805. They're new to the colors, but they've inherited that culture.
Yes.
And so they're charging forward very enthusiastically, saying, come on, let's go.
Yeah.
The spirit of the revolution lived on.
Yeah, and they're fighting like veterans.
Yeah.
Maybe even better than veterans, because they're being a little more reckless, because they haven't seen half their friends blown apart by canister yet.
Yeah. And
something to be said with an army that's been victorious for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You might be new, but now you're surrounded by not only veterans but winners.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Wellington's comment in the movie Waterloo that Napoleon's hat was worth 50,000 men.
Mm. Yeah, the reverse of that, though, is that, as you're seeing with the Russians and right now in the Ukraine, is you can take a bunch of conscripts or mobiks, and you can call them like the 56 Guards Rifle Motor Battalion, and it doesn't mean anything because there's no tradition around them, right? They're just they're just a mob of sullen, ill-equipped guys in an army that has no legitimacy. So it's amazing that the French army held together for so long, just because, as you said, they had that heritage. We've talked about Napoleonics so much that I think some people might think this is the Canadian Napoleonics podcast. But Glenn, you're also interested in the American Revolutionary War.
Yes.
Yeah. How did that come about? Did that kind of grow out of just a general horse and musket interest, or?
Well, I've always been interested in all periods of warfare.
Okay.
But the thing that nailed it for me was Peter Berry of Baccus had been soliciting a number of writers to write a set of rules for the American War of Independence. And they all failed to do it because they didn't really understand the Polmos system of rules and how they actually worked. And I did, because I'd been playing his Napoleonic versions for a number of years. And so I said, I could write an American War of Independence set of rules if you wanted me to. And he said, sure, okay, go ahead for it. So I did, and in writing it, I did even more research than I had in years before, and dug deeper into it, and began to realize just how suitable it was for the Polmos series of rules. And then I looked at the other wars in North America, which were not really covered, and probably never would cover them because they're kind of small change to the English market. And that was the French and Indian War and the War of 1812.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked closely at that, I saw that warfare really didn't change through all that period. the things that changed were the compositions of the armies. You have the French and Indian War, where it's basically a skirmish war. You got the couple of big battles and that's it. Everything else is kind of a skirmish.
Mhm.
So that's happening. And then you move into the American War of Independence, and you kind of got the same guys who fought in the French and Indian War fighting in that war. And the only difference is there's more battles, but the battles are more kind of 7 year warish in that they're all fighting in line. And so again, that's about it. And the composition of the army starts to change, where they actually have some light troops. They have some light infantry, and of course the militias are basically all light troops.
Mhm.
So now you're looking at kind of a maturity of the French and Indian War. And so you're not really changing. What's changing is the composition of the armies. The tactics are still similar. The weapons are still similar. And then you make the move to the War of 1812, which is nothing more than the Napoleonic War in North America. And again, you see the same thing. You've got the lines, like they're not using columns like they do in Europe. So it's just an extension of the American War of Independence, only again, they're a little more professional. The hardcore British Army coming with tremendous experience from Europe fighting the Americans, whose army is not as well trained or veteran as the British, but over time they mature and start to become formidable enemies too. But they're using very similar tactics that have been used throughout the history of North America.
Mhm.
Formed units where possible, skirmish units where it's more practical.
And
Right.
you're playing all these in 6mm as well?
Yes, in fact,
Okay.
so that's how the rules evolved. Ruse de Guerre, and we also use it for American Civil War, using the same philosophy that things really haven't changed there either. Weaponry is a little stronger. The firepower is a little more deadly. Artillery is definitely more deadly. But they're fighting in a similar way. They're fighting in closed lines, and they're fighting in skirmish order. And they're fighting in woods, which they've been doing since the French and Indian War. So there's not a lot of big differences there either.
So
Mhm.
you're just changing the, like, in your Napoleonic battles, each stand, each maneuver unit, you're pushing around as a battalion.
Yes.
But you for French and Indian Wars, American Revolution, you're like each stand is a company now, or?
It can be.
Mhm.
That's one of the secrets of the rules is you can start off your collection at a very small number of figures, and your battles can be small. But as your collection grows, your size of your battles can grow, and your stand can be called different things. In some games, your stand might be called half a battalion.
Mhm.
And in some games, it might be a company. It depends on how you want to work it. And
Okay.
other games, it could be a battalion, it could be a regiment, it could even be a brigade if you wanted to go to extremes and fight Leipzig.
Mhm.
So
So
you can use the same collection and the same
yes,
set of rules
yes,
for everything from Leipzig down to, I've got 2 battalions and some Grenzers and 2 guns defending a bridge.
yes,
Huh,
exactly.
cool.
And in fact, we just recently we played the Battle of Cowpens from the American War of Independence.
Right.
And in the rule book, it's one stand is a battalion. And we had more players than the game really needed. So what we did is we doubled the figures. So now the units were bigger. So a player only had to command a couple of units, and he had a nice size force to handle for the day.
Mhm.
So we fought the same battle at twice the table space and twice the number of figures. And the interesting thing is the game has a sort of different dynamic to it as you play it, because now there's more things in motion. So it even the experienced people who had played cowpins before found that the dynamics had changed, where they had to rethink their game.
Neat.
That is super cool. Yeah, it's funny. Like when I think of the French and Indian War, which I don't honestly know a lot about. The only battle that I could think of that I would think of would really look European would be the Plains of Abraham, and everything else. Everything else, it seems to me, is asymmetric, right? It's French and Indian light troops, fighting, trying to find advantage against the British that has more regular troops, but develops better light troops over time, right? So,
Yes.
Which I guess is why, a lot of the miniature rules out there on that period are kind of more skirmishy.
Yep.
Yeah, but so what would are there any other battles that you've modeled from that period other than, like the Plains of Abraham that are kind of
Well,
more?
the following year was the Battle of Saint Foy on the same battlefield.
Right.
So we that's in the rule book too. Those two are the main ones for the French and Indian War.
Yeah.
There's another couple of actions around Quebec, though, like sort of on the other side where Wolfe tried to land some troops and there is fighting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. The first phase basically of the battle.
Yeah.
Wolfe tried to he thought that was a weak point and he found out it wasn't. So he had to go back and rethink his plan again.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity for my part, you mentioned board games earlier. Have you ever looked at that the GMT board game for that period, Bayonets and Tomahawks?
Oh no, once I got into miniatures, I never played a board game since.
All right. Okay. Fair enough.
See, Mike.
It's just an itch that I vainly scratch. But that's a really fascinating, like a strategic level game of the whole theater, from kind of like Virginia all the way up to Quebec and so forth. And yeah, it's actually designed by a Canadian guy out of Montreal. It's a pretty cool game, but it would be I think it could be a great scenario generator if you were looking for a fusion between a board game and miniatures gaming. But anyway, it's neither here nor there. Where else do we want to go?
Okay, I can show you the books. That won't take long.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the Napoleonic Miniatures War Game Society of Toronto. So that's your baby, right? That's your brainchild?
Yeah, well, I'm the third gatekeeper.
Oh, the third.
The first guy, as I said, it was in his basement in the Beaches.
Okay.
And then it was taken over by his son and a friend of his. They turned it into a 25 millimeter Napoleonics. And then the club went to a fork in the road.
It's not me. I think
Can I call you back? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
We can edit that out. It's okay.
Yeah, so when it went to a fork in the road, the 25 millimeter group carried on for a while, but the 6 millimeter group stayed and gradually grew in, and so we took the name, a different name than what they had, the Marshallette. We called it the Napoleonic Wargamer Society of Toronto, and but we kept their date of when they started because we felt that that was legitimate. We're legitimate off-road, but next year will be the 58th year of the club.
Oh.
Oh.
So it's now most of that's now been under my tutorship, but it did pre-exist before I took it over.
Wow. That must make you maybe the oldest War Games club in Canada.
I believe we're one of the oldest Napoleonic clubs in the world,
Wow.
because most clubs are diversified for one thing. You know,
Yeah.
they play different periods. They don't necessarily focus in on one period like we did.
Yeah.
And after a few years, there were other Napoleonic clubs around the world, but they started later than us, and I don't think any of them exist anymore either.
Hmm.
But even as a club per se, we probably are older than any other club, or very many clubs anyway.
Yeah. But you also do, as you said, you do some American Civil War stuff as well.
Yeah, we do American Civil War, and right now we're working on some World War II rules,
Oh, okay.
which we hope to bring out to light in another maybe 5 years or so.
I like how you're thinking long term. Are you looking at those Baccus World War II figures?
Yeah, that's the motivation.
Yeah.
When Peter brought them out, I always enjoyed playing some World War II games, but I always found them extremely tedious, most of them.
Mm.
The rules were usually thicker than a Bible. One group I played with for a while, they had 3 rule books, and they were written by different people, of course. And when you fired this tank, you had to go to this rule book. When you fired another tank, you had to go to another rule book.
Hmm.
And you spent most of your time twiddling your thumbs. But anyway, the whole micro world kind of didn't seem to fit my style of gaming very well. I spent most of my time sleeping during those games. So we, when Peter brought it out, I said to him, maybe I could write a World War II set for you, and on a similar vein as Ruse de Guerre, you know, making it faster, maybe at a higher level than what most of them are at, so you can fight some bigger battles rather than just small skirmishes, which seems to be the domain of most of the 6mm rule sets.
Yeah.
And make it more interesting and fast, yet still have a feel of World War II. So
Yeah.
those are the points we strive at, and we know we're not going to achieve that overnight.
Glenn, I'm just curious, have you looked at the O group rules?
Yes, I got a copy of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything in there you like?
No.
We appreciate that.
I mean, they're a well-written set of rules, there's no question, but they're focused on a different size of game than what we are.
Okay.
And that O group is very small tactical stuff, and we want bigger strategical stuff. So in other words, a tank in the rules I'm writing will represent, one model will represent 10 vehicles.
Oh, okay.
That kind of concept.
So
whereas an O group, a tank is a tank.
so your games would be like brigade or higher level?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, because my research on World War II, what I have seen is most of the combats are, you can at least zero down to a division fight. Even in a big battle, you can zero down to a divisional fight and get something going out of it. Whereas in most of the rules, you're at a battalion level fighting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay, but you're fighting around the one village or something and that's about it. Whereas I think from a more strategic point of view, which I feel makes for a more exciting game, you got a larger area to deal with, and you have more problems once you have more area.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives the players more to deal with as well, as opposed to, okay, you take those buildings over there. You know, that's not exciting for me in playing a game.
Yeah, I've certainly always had that, like playing at the company or battalion level.
Yes.
You're very much sort of like you're doing a Normandy campaign game, which most of us seem to play. And yeah, like, you know, your company gets, you know, you get defeated making your attack. And it's like, well, ho hum, we fall back to our start line, and brigade's just going to tee up another attack.
Yes.
They're going to rotate the next company through to our start line, and we're going to just play this scenario over again with a couple of extra wrecked vehicles in the fields. And
Exactly.
so it's kind of hard to, I don't know, winning and losing isn't quite as sort of important, if that's right.
Yes.
But you'd probably, how would you do the time scale? Because I think, most divisional level or battles are fought over several days, aren't they?
True. We're going to be using the same kind of time logic that applies in Ruse de Guerre, which is another interesting development that I discovered years ago by a given author, and his name was George Jeffrey. You ever hear of him?
George Jeffrey. No, can't say I have.
Anyway, he was a Scotsman, and he wrote a number of rules, but he's most famous for a concept called VLB, and that stands for variable length bound.
Okay.
Okay.
And what he did was he developed a system where you could move great lengths of time based on your orders.
Right.
And as things changed, you could then change your orders, but you had to have a valid reason that something changed. And what he was able to do was play large battles over large areas because many troops were on a mission and their orders didn't change. So they could cover a lot of ground. Whereas in traditional games, which are on smaller tables, things change every turn because you can see the guy and you know what he's doing. So he was able to play these big battles, but he was one of the only people to really master the concept. But a lot of people writing rules at the time understood what he was driving at. And they were collectively working on a Napoleonic set. He had written a number of Napoleonic rules, but none using his VLB concept. And so a group was formed to try to write a Napoleonic rules using his concept, but it went on for years and years and years and never really got anything done. But I understood his system, and we played it for a couple of years, and here as part of my group. And new players were mystified by it. They couldn't really understand it because part of it was you had to explain your game plan to the other side before the game started.
Ooh.
And people were uncomfortable with that, but they failed to realize that both sides explaining their plan, there was no options to change it. So you told the other side your plan and they told you their plan, and neither side could change the plan until they intersected each other.
Okay.
And you needed an umpire to follow the other sides, and then the umpire could tell you, okay, you could see these guys, now what are you going to do?
Right.
So then you could change that part of your plan, but you couldn't change anything else because that's the only part that changed.
Yeah.
But people were very uncomfortable with having to explain their entire plan because they felt that they're giving away their game.
Yeah.
Have you ever played the Empire rules?
I did once and never again.
Well, yeah, I totally.
As a number of people did, yes.
Yes, yes.
But they had that long bound thing too.
Yeah. You're moving your cores, and he called his telescoping time system, TTS.
Yeah. He took that concept, I think, from George Jeffries and molded it into the Empire system and called it what he wanted to call it. Yeah. But it's a similar idea.
It sounds to me a little bit like what I understand Matrix games to be, where you say, I will I will, for example, I will attack on the right because I have, my artillery massed here, and I have my troops are rested, and I have good armor support, and I expect to be able to break through based on, the terrain or whatever. And then the referee says, okay, well, thanks for your assumptions, and then here's what actually happens.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Staff game.
Kind of, yeah. It sounds a little bit like it's borrowing some of the ideas from a classic Kriegspiel. Without giving
Yes.
away any information, James and I are playing in a Kriegspiel right now, a Napoleonic Kriegspiel, run by somebody called Wendy DeWolf. We're hoping to have,
listening.
yeah, we're hoping to have Wendy on before, just as at the sort of culmination of the Kriegspiel to tell us who was who and what actually happened, because it's quite fascinating. But yeah, you're starting to get away from that, what you're describing, Glenn, that kind of God's eye view of the battlefield, where you and your opponent are watching everything that you do, and you know exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Acting every turn instead of the, you lose out on the big sweeping, we've got Ney sweeping around the flank at Lutzen and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, or the possibility of being just totally surprised with your pants down, right?
Yeah,
because you just didn't guard that road, and you assume somebody else was guarding it, and they were off on their own mission, right? So it was some gap opens up between two corps, and suddenly you're screwed. Glenn, what World War II theater or time frame would interest you? As sort of what would you focus on doing this?
Well, we're following Peter's lead at Baccus. His first focus is Normandy.
Oh, okay.
So we're looking at that as trying to be a Kickstarter for us, and then possibly move forward from there or backwards, whichever way we want to go.
Okay.
But that's our starting point.
Normandy certainly, very well researched. You can find tons of very detailed maps for all your
Yes, exactly. That's critical.
And there's huge numbers of divisional size or corps size battles as allies try and batter their way out of the bridgehead.
Yeah, exactly.
But pretty constrained in terms of your ability to maneuver, right? I mean, you're at least on the British side, you often read about how the frontages were so limited because there were so many formations jammed into such a small area.
Yes.
I can't help but think if I was going to do 6mm World War II, and God stop me from such a silly idea, I would do the Western Desert, just because it's so fascinating. You've got these, this wide range of early to mid-war tanks, and you've got tons and tons of real estate to swan around in.
Yes, true.
Although, I mean, like if you're, say if you're doing, Operation Totalize.
Yeah.
And you've got your narrow front that your corps is fighting on. Well, that's the table, right?
Yeah.
So it gives us a logical reason for you can't maneuver off the table because now you're going outside of your core boundary.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, good point.
Whereas, I mean, the Western Desert, Rommel had all of 3 divisions?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And it's a sort of, roll a dice. Oh, you ran out of gas. You're done.
Yeah.
So here's how we deal with time. I'll give you a quote.
Okay.
It says, time. There is no actual time scale in Polmos Ruse de Guerre. A turn represents a focus of action that can include any number of actual movements, firings, formation and cohesion changes, and critical dispositions or critical decisions.
Mm-hmm.
The turn is simply a reference point for the variable period of time. Every turn can represent a different length of time. If reinforcements are to arrive or some critical event should take place, simply use a practical timeline number of turns that fits with your scenario. In other words, what we're advocating in the rules is this turn does not represent 5 minutes. It can represent any period of time you like. And these are the results of the actions that happened during that time. So this turn, you might have 2 or 3 fights that could have lasted longer or shorter. Next turn, you might have only 1 fight that also could have lasted longer or shorter. So time is kind of a elusive element
Right.
in the game system. And all we're focusing down on is critical actions that happen during that time. So that's how we justify there's no time, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So it's more, I don't know, is it fair to say more episodic?
Yeah,
You're focusing on discrete episodes of a battle rather than, you know, like tracking every single minute.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Which is-
Crossfire sort of does that too.
Hmm.
You know, you just move until something happens.
And
Yeah.
and you also avoid those arguments. Well, you couldn't have done that in that short time. Well, you know, all those silly nonsense things you got into in a lot of traditional
Yeah.
rules.
Where you get with like things like opportunity fire or whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Very
Right.
tactical stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't get. We're not into the weeds.
Yeah.
We're into the results.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's being top down instead of worrying about
Exactly.
penetration versus armor versus rates of fire and yada 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 yada.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Glenn, I know you're focused on your own set of rules, but have you looked at Sam Mustafa's Rommel rules? I haven't. I'm just curious if you've had a chance to look at them.
Yes. Actually, ironically, that was sort of an inspiration for me.
Oh, okay.
I thought he was our rules or my rules, whatever you want, will be on a similar level.
Okay.
Because I think he nailed the level pretty good there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a fan of board games anymore, and that Rommel, I don't mean to be offensive, but it strikes me as a board game.
Yeah. No offense to
And
you.
you're just using miniatures.
Yeah, because it
And I
plays
think-
on a grid, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a brilliant idea, and a lot of people like it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are the important things. Sam knows how to design rules to meet his marketplace because he knows what his marketplace wants,
Yeah.
and that's what he does, and he does it very well. But I was just fascinated with the level of game he played, because that's what I saw was a practical level to play at versus the traditional game where you're just playing companies and squads and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need the higher level to get anything historical out of it, other than small squad actions. That's all. So
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, it's occasionally I think about buying Rommel just to read it because I love Sam's rules, but then I think, no, I'm not going to go there.
yeah, well, he has a very large fan base. There's no question.
Yeah, we've talked to some of them, and I think he's like I often wonder if he's like a North American thing, right? I want, because I never hear Brits or Europeans talk about his rules, but he's got a very dedicated network of people, including
Americans.
here in Canada, college
Yes.
age, right? Yeah. And
Well, I mean, he has managed to get into the light.
yeah,
He promotes himself. A lot of companies don't do that.
yeah,
Baccus, for instance, has no marketing. Everything is word of mouth,
yes,
and that's it. Whereas Sam markets his his games, and he does it very well.
yeah,
And he has built a very loyal following, and all his rules are enjoyed by many people. And I think he's doing a great job because he's serving a market that's out there.
Well, I know James and I have had fun with them, and some of them I think they're really they're fun to play, like they're gamey, like Longstreet. James, you had
Yeah.
that great picture of me with that card on my birthday many years ago.
Yes, your big shit-eating grin as you
Yeah,
foiled some attack I was about to make.
yeah. It's you know it's but then some of his rules I think are a little more like they scratch some of the same itches that you were talking about, Glenn, about formation, right? Like, you know, that's why I think Blucher is such a cool game, because yeah, it's all formation. Formation's all abstracted in it. Glenn, where do you see 6mm going? I mean, it's as you said, Baccus has got such a great following. There's some other companies, but I noticed, for example, that our friend Sean in the UK has wrapped up his God's Own Scale podcast, and I got the impression, I don't know, I haven't followed him in the last few months or the last few episodes, but I got the impression he was kind of like running out of things to say about 6mm. Do you think it's a scale that's sort of still here to stay and it's got legs, or?
I think Sean has some personal issues that he doesn't really want to talk publicly about.
Okay,
I don't
fair
think it
enough.
has anything to do with his podcasts or his
Yeah,
Facebook line. He's backed away from his Facebook page as well as the podcast. But
yeah.
he's still actively gaming and playing, so I'm not
Well,
really
that's
sure
good.
what his problem is, but
Well,
I
that's
don't think
good.
it has anything to do with the scale.
Yeah, I don't want to. I don't know the story, and I want to respect his privacy. But I really admired the way he was an advocate for 6mm. I
Yes,
know you are.
and he did open the doors for a lot of people, no question.
Yeah, yeah,
Big following he had,
yeah.
and
Absolutely.
he may still return. I think that's not a given.
I hope he does. I hope he does for sure.
But
We still,
the you mentioned the scale itself. As far as I can tell, the scale is exploding,
yeah, yeah,
and there was a time when the hobby was dominated by 25s, which it still is, 25s, 28s,
right.
which it still is. And then 15mm was the second. And after that, everything was kind of a wash.
Yeah,
And 6mm, I think, has moved in strongly into third place.
hmm,
And I see that by the people who contact me.
okay,
There were times when years would go by and nobody would ever contact me or ask me about six or anything like that.
yeah,
Whereas, especially during COVID, I was talking to new people every week,
mm, mm,
and I think it kind of goes hand in hand with Baccus. Baccus started out with just him and one other guy, and
yeah,
his staff and the machines and the production. I think he sells more than in 6mm than all the others combined. I wouldn't be
yeah.
surprised. But he's definitely a powerhouse. He puts on the Joy of Six every year. I don't know if you heard of that.
Oh,
Yep.
yes. I hope to make it over to the UK one year for that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I mean, he's running his own convention there that show you how. And every year
yeah,
there are more traders in six than there were the previous year.
yes, yeah.
If anything, I think 6mm might be coming on a strong second. I think 15mm is starting to, except for maybe World War II, I think 15s are starting to disappear
I think you're
Yeah.
right.
because they're losing out on the price point versus 28s,
Yeah.
right? Because now with all the plastic 28s coming out, have brought the price down of big armies.
Yeah,
You know, what's the point of buying 15s anymore? And if you want, you know, lots of troops, you want that big operational level, then yeah, you might as well just go right down to 6 and
yeah.
do a
Or
brigade that's a couple of inches square.
yeah. Although it was interesting, James and I talked a few months ago with some of the folks behind Tundra Miniatures,
Oh, well, there you go.
and they're choosing to do 18mm, which I guess is the new 15. But
Yes.
Heroic 15s.
yeah, but I think the appeal of the small scale is 6 and I would say 10 as well, is that if I wanted to get into a new period and I wanted to get into it soon, I would choose 6 or 10.
Yeah.
I got into Napoleonics with 6 and I haven't regretted it. And I mean, I think James and I have a nice agreement where if we want to play 28s, I play with his stuff. And if he wants to play 6, he can play with my stuff. But I don't see 6 much at Canadian shows. Not that I get out much, but
Well, you're going to see more at Hot Lead.
Yeah. Okay.
Because Keith's doing a lot of stuff with Blucher.
Keith and Brian Hall. Yeah.
And
yeah.
Brian Hall, I don't think Brian Hall has anything that isn't 6mm anymore.
Yeah. Next to Glenn, I'd say Brian is like Mr. 6mm.
All his periods he does in 6mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's there's Glenn's group usually runs a game, and sometimes Ian Tetlow will do he'll sometimes bring out a 6mm game.
Okay.
Depends on what he's interested in that year.
Yeah. Yeah.
But whatever he brings, it'll be pretty.
Glenn, have you been following any of the 3D print 6mm stuff that people like Henry Turner are doing? Yeah. What do you think of it?
I think it's marvelous.
Yeah.
He seems to be producing top quality figures. I know a number of guys who were avid 6mm metal collectors who have walked away from it and have gone strictly with Turner products.
Yeah.
I see that just looking at them, that they're easier to paint. The definition's stronger. I'm not really a plastic fan myself, or a printed figure.
Yeah.
But I have painted some, and they look marvelous.
Yeah.
And 6mm has the joy or the benefit of 3 feet away. You can still tell what the figure is, but you can't really tell the paint job or the quality of the figure. So it's a kind of a wash.
Yeah.
You can get them and paint them fast. You can get them cheaper. It's definitely coming on strong in the market in 6, as well as some other scales now as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. The only drawback I see with them is their fragility, right? So,
yes. Well, actually, the Turners, as well as some others,
yeah,
I understand are pretty sturdy.
Well, they are, but once you cure them with UV light, they can become a little brittle, and I know that because I had a whole base of Cossacks with lances.
Yeah.
Which I stupidly dropped. Of course, it fell the wrong way down, just like a peanut butter sandwich.
Gotcha.
Every single lance on the base, because it was 15 figures all cast in a strip.
Yeah.
Every single goddamn lance broke.
So I had some from I bought from, or actually they sent me from Poland.
Yeah.
And they were pretty nice figures, but they were extremely fragile.
Yeah.
As well.
That
depends on what resin you're using, right?
Yeah.
I guess so. I don't know.
It's all in the chemicals.
Yeah. So I'm torn. I mean, I think I got into 3D printing last year. I don't regret it, but I'm not convinced that at the end of the day, it's easier than dropping a lot of money on a big order from a Baccus or an Adler or even a Pendrick. And if you want to do it in 10mm, right? Because then you get all the figures, whereas you don't have to laboriously print 50 at a time. And
yeah, I don't have the time or inclination to print.
Yeah.
Or to buy or to look after the machine and have it upkeep of the machine.
Yeah,
I don't see it. The other thing I see as great. The other thing I see as a great advantage is the inventory that, say, a company like Baccus has.
Yes.
I can change periods on a whim and have all the figures I want here in a couple of weeks. And there they are. All I got to do is find the time to paint them.
Well, there you go. Now, if we just had a printing machine that made spare time, that would be like that would be a TARDIS. Yeah.
But I'm assuming, though, at some point in time, you're probably going to be able to paint the figures as you print them.
Yes, yeah, I've heard talk.
That's got to be somewhere down the line.
Color printing.
Yeah.
Yeah, in which case you might as well buy like painted toy soldiers from Britain's or something like that. I think.
Well, except that cost is a lot more.
Well, yeah, but it's like you have to decide, is that how much of that? I don't know. I mean, lots of people game with figures that they hire third parties to paint for them, and they seem to have a good time. So I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. How much of the hobby do you like? Do you enjoy the painting aspect of it versus the playing?
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
You know?
For me, painting was always a chore until I started painting Baccus figures.
Yeah,
And I'm not really sure what the change was, but I do enjoy them, and I do enjoy seeing them done and finished and on the table. So
absolutely.
speed.
Yeah, and I'm with you, Glenn. And I find for me the pleasure of it is that I don't agonize over every bloody figure. I don't agonize about whether the shading right or the face right or
gotcha.
You know, it's just like blip blip blip. There's the, you know, I can do 20 faces, I can do 20 shakos, I can do, you know, I can, if I, you know, it's that, and it's impressionistic at the end. It's like our friend Sean likes to say, right? You paint the unit, not the figure.
Yes. The
Yeah.
thing that turned me around was I remember when I was painting 25s, I was painting a Prussian army, and I painted 12 battalions of Prussian grenadiers. It took me all summer, and I was so excited to get them on the table, and nobody really noticed.
Oh, rude.
Oh dear.
I just said, this is something I spent my summer on, and no one said, hey,
oh dear.
are those new figures?
I think I would notice someone showing up with 12 battalions of grenadiers.
Yeah. You would think, but
probably
no,
would too.
They just made general conversation. They got into the game, and no one even mentioned them at all.
Yeah, yeah. That's
So
why
I
you
said
start every game with like a 10-minute show and tell session, right? You know, so everybody pretends to be polite while they wait for people to compliment their figures. Anyway. Yeah. We should probably start wrapping up. Do you want to go to the books segment? Glenn, what have you got for us in the way of books that you want to deposit in the Canadian Wargamer podcast library?
I got actually a book here. I'm reading on Cowpens, 1781.
Okay, I'm going to start making some notes here so I can tape up the show notes. Cowpens, 1781. Yeah.
And it's by Ed and Catherine Gilbert.
Okay. Why is it good?
I'm reading that simply because we just played the battle, and one of the members had the book and he gave it to me to read, so I'm reading it.
Oh, okay.
And now I also got on the go. I got Napoleon and Grouchy by Paul Dawson.
Mm.
And this supposedly unravels the mystery, the last great Waterloo mystery unraveled.
And what's that?
Between Napoleon and Grouchy, the argument is historical that Grouchy failed, and that's why Napoleon lost Waterloo, and that's what Napoleon was adamant about. But Grouchy and Grouchy followers say no, it was all Napoleon's fault, and Grouchy is blameless.
Okay.
Paul has done tedious work on who was where, what orders were written, and the almost a moment by moment play of those couple of critical days.
Yeah, I just read Grouchy's Waterloo by a name I can't remember now, and he's too far away. Which analyzing that whole thing too. It's very, very interesting, and getting into his analysis really got into what did people know? It's criticized looking back with perfect hindsight, but what did Napoleon know when he wrote that order?
That's right.
that
Yeah.
got sent, and what did Grouchy know when he received that order, and getting into the wording of the order, and was it clear or not, and yeah.
Mhm.
The critical thing I always felt was that orders aside, Grouchy, in my opinion, failed simply because he had a third of the army at his disposal, and he was the right flank of the army. And when he knew, which he did the night before, that the Prussians were heading towards Brussels, he should have moved rather than have a night's sleep and plan the Battle of Wavre the next day. And if he had have moved, he could have prevented the Prussians from joining up at Waterloo. But he
Hmm.
didn't.
I think by the time he was approaching Wavre, though, the chance to, like, there's that river between him and Napoleon, and his chance that he should have, Napoleon should have had him cross that river a day or two before,
Mhm.
right, and made more specific, more clear orders about, you're my flank guard.
Yeah, the problem is Napoleon at that point in time didn't have any more information than Grouchy had. Grouchy actually had more information than Napoleon.
Interesting.
And he decided that he felt he was doing the right thing because he knew a sizable Prussian force was in front of him at the Wavre, but he also knew Prussians were moving more towards Belgium. So in my book, he should have immediately realized what the Prussian game was. They were stalling him while the rest of the army moved to Waterloo.
Well, but
And
there's also the thought that, yeah, because like the Prussians were basically moving cross country. There
yes,
weren't any major roads between Wavre and Mont Saint Jean.
yeah,
Everybody thought this is a rear guard action while they fall back to Brussels, where they're going to meet Wellington.
yes,
So if I just keep pushing, then I'm doing what the emperor has ordered me to do.
right.
Not really thinking that they're going to deke left.
Mhm.
And
Not only that, in all fairness to him, he didn't know that Waterloo was going to be fought the next day.
yeah,
Mhm.
like it comes back down to, yeah, like, you may be the boss, but it's your subordinates that make you look good. And if a subordinate fails, it's usually because they didn't have clear instructions, or you didn't support them adequately, or you put the wrong person in the job.
Mhm.
I think that the third one is the most valid one. I think he was out of his element. He
Well, but
he had never been that level of a commander before.
yeah, well, and Napoleon was kind of struggling with, a lot of his good corps commanders were dead by this time.
Or
Yes.
they set out the campaign like or they were back in, like McDonald set out the 100 days. Davout was back in Paris doing staff work. Yeah.
And
That-
and then he also had, his very capable guys capable of independent command had to hold down the Rhine and Italy and these other fronts.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Is there another title there for us, Glenn?
Okay, you asked about which ones were influential on me. Was of course the Campaigns of Napoleon by David Chandler.
a classic.
I read that a number of times. I've got Scott Bowen, The Glory Years, Napoleon and Austerlitz.
Mhm.
Was a excellent book in getting into the details of that campaign. Very, very well written, a very knowledgeable individual.
Cool. I don't know that book.
Well, Crisis on the Danube by James Arnold. Another great inspirational author. I've read a number of his books as well as Scott Bowden's books. And of course, Chandler. All three of them are brilliant. And I've got Battle Tactics of the Civil War, the American Civil War, by Paddy Griffith,
Ah, yes.
another excellent authority on the period, Napoleonic and Civil War. And the last one is The Anatomy of Victory, Battle Tactics 1689 to 1763 by Brent Noseworthy.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
And he is another great scholar who I respect. And all those guys collectively, I've read most of the books, and all of them influenced me one way or another, and generally helped develop my overall view on Napoleonic warfare.
Yeah, yeah. I like the way earlier when you were talking about how your reading of history led you to rethink some of the kind of standard bits that we assume every war game should have, like formation changes and so forth. So that's a great example, Glenn, of how reading informs gaming and game design.
Well, yeah, it was just so strange because I was introduced to the game and told this is the way the game works. You have formation changes, and the first rule, one of the first rule sets I was introduced, here was called, we actually had to march out the steps for a wheel.
Oh,
So you got your protractor out and your ruler, and you measured the movement for your wheeling. And if you were changing formation, you had to actually take your stands and wheel them into those formations. You just didn't change the formation.
So you need to have the drill manual in one hand and the rule book in the other.
Yeah. And that's the way the rules were written. And I kept saying to myself, this isn't fun. What the hell am I doing? How am I doing this for? I got into wargaming to fight, to have some action, and all I'm doing is measuring.
That's been a theme tonight, is why are we doing this when it's so much fun?
And so over time, I began to see that the rules I was playing was going in one direction, and all the information I was reading was going in a totally different direction. The two were never marrying anywhere.
Yeah, very much the argument of bottom up versus top down.
Yes.
And
yeah, and that's exactly how our traditional rules were built.
Yeah,
from the bottom up, because they were around about small actions. Yeah, and then they morphed into trying to do bigger actions using those same details, and it just killed the game.
Yeah, those Napoleonic rules, yeah, where you're measuring out the paces and moving each company as your battalion changes formation.
Yeah,
the same as the World War II rules, where you're worrying about armor versus penetration and angle of hit, and how many gears is in the transmission box on this tank versus that tank.
Right. Yep. Now some people love that, and I respect that, but that's not my game. I don't enjoy those things.
No. Wow. Well, Glenn, thanks so much for being our guest tonight. This has been a great almost an hour and a half of conversation. Yeah. We've really enjoyed it. I will put a link to your Facebook page. And as our march out at the end of the podcast, our tradition is to do something that is meaningful to a guest that also connects with the Canadian military music tradition. And you told us that you liked bagpipe music.
Yep.
And you're in Toronto, so we have found the regimental march of the Toronto Scottish Regiment, which is Blue Bonnets Over the Border. And
all right.
We'll play that at the end of the podcast. So thanks, mate. I really appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate spending time with the two of you. It was delightful.
Yeah, we will check in again down the road and see how your World War II rolls are going.
Yeah.
Well, by all means.
Okay. All right.
Night, Glenn.
Good night, guys.
Thanks.
like in a Cthulhu thing. At no right angles.
Right. Coming to you from the mountains of madness, for the rectory of madness. It's part 2 of the Canadian Wargamer podcast, episode 20. James and I are back about a week or so after we talked with Glenn Pearce, because we're not on a tight production time frame. James, how are you tonight?
Oh, we're okay. It's kind of snowy down here, but you know.
Yes, wickedly cold tonight here in Collingwood. And I was taking the dog out for a little walk before we got on the air, and I was saying my dog walking prayer in the cold, which is please poop, please poop. For the love of God, poop.
Let's find a tree you like.
So you don't get me up at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. So
winter's certainly come back after our nice little week thaw.
yeah, it's been very strange here. We went up to about, I think, 10 degrees yesterday or something like that.
All the snow melted.
All the snow melted, yeah, but we might still have a white Christmas. So yeah, we're back about a week after we talked to Glenn Pearce. So it was a great conversation. I was just doing a little peek on the Baccus website, Glenn's rules, the Polemos Ruse de Guerre rules, also known on the Polemos website as the POLRDG, Pollardig.
Wow, you know, you got to have an acronym for your rules.
Yeah, it's not a great acronym, but
yeah, it doesn't roll off the tongue.
Yeah. And they are advertised as war games rules designed to bring out the best in your 6 mil armies, quick to play, easy to use, but with a command system designed to make you think. And
Quick to play, easy to use. We've heard that in all the rules.
yeah, I believe Glenn though what he says.
Well, you know, and I would be interested in, you know, as he says, it's very scalable. You know, if you're playing American War of Independence, a stand can be a company. And
Yeah.
then, or you're playing like Leipzig, a stand is a brigade.
Mhm.
I was like, I think I'd want to play that to see how it would work.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because I did at a broadsword, many years back now, because COVID.
Mhm.
I played a really cool 6mm. Was it War of Independence? I think it was War of Independence.
Mhm.
It was British versus somebody, and we had Indian allies. Yeah, so I think it was War of Independence, not War of 1812. And but it was 6mm, and the ground scale matched the figures.
Wow.
Yeah. So like half a centimeter was 2 meters. You know, so like, visually you see like, these short little musket ranges, but no, it's like your musket range was like way out there because it was a scaled, accurately scaled musket. Okay, your chances to hit that far down the field were pretty bad, but and each little stand, like each figure was a figure. So your stand of, I can't remember what he had them on, like, it was like 2 ranks. I think it was maybe 40 guys in the stand. So it was like, a half company.
Mhm.
And you were maneuvering your battalion. I was maneuvering my wing of my battalion around and my little detachment of guys, and and it was very cool. It was really cool to experience that game. I definitely, if Barnaby does another broadsword that's opened up to things other than Lardy rules. I think right now his focus is on the Lardy days,
Right.
which is a bit limiting. But if he opens up a broadsword again, Barnaby, talking to you, I'd definitely be interested in playing that guy's game again.
Mhm.
It was really neat. So I would like, I would be interested to try with the Ruse de Guerre is, do a game with, stand as a company and a game with a stand as a brigade and see, like, do they just feel the same? Or do they actually, am I making a, battalion firing line with companies, or,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I'm trying to vaguely remember 3 years ago when I actually went to Glenn's place in Scarborough and his gaming basement, which is a pretty impressive place. And we were playing the Battle of Ligny, and the whole battle was on the table. I couldn't tell you what the skill was, but it was abstracted, but there was the town of Ligny and the landmarks like the windmill, the famous windmill in the battlefield.
Yeah, that wasn't a small little Pragus.
They're fairly large, like a couple of quarters a side.
Yeah.
And I remember the game flowed fairly quickly. I had a little bit of trouble grasping the initiative and the use of command points, but I think that's just because it's your first game.
Yeah, we need to.
Playing the system. But I would certainly recommend to any of our listeners, if you are in the Greater Toronto area or close to it, and you wanted to try 6 mil gaming, I would get a hold of Glenn, because going through some of my emails, I'm still on the invites for his gaming group. They've gone, just in the last year, they've gone to Medino de Rio Seco, the Peninsular War battle he talked about. They've done Cowpens. They did the Battle of Shiloh. They did Castiglione, which is one of the early Napoleonic wars in Italy. Eichingen.
Italian theater doesn't get covered much.
Yeah, for sure. And so you have to take your tricorn or your Shako off to Glenn and his group for the range of battles that they do.
And being able to cover, a big battle like Lingi and have it flow smoothly and do it in a day, I assume it was like a 6-hour session or something with a meal break.
Yeah, Glenn sort of starts around 9 and you're out the door by 4. It's pretty.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's that's something to not sneeze at.
No, for sure.
So, I guess if I was going to do 6 mil, I would definitely look at these rules.
Yeah, I'm going to put the link to the Ruse de Guerre rules from the Baccus website on our show notes. The Baccus website says they're also available from Wargames Vault, so I will put that.
Okay, yeah, so you can just print them yourself.
Yeah, I think so. And while I'm looking at the Palamas website, I'm looking at their little refreshing bar on the side where it's showing me all of their 6 mil World War II stuff, and I'm curious to see what Glenn's ideas for World War II gaming are.
Yeah, because he wants to do like division core size actions, which it's then you're kind of you're not removing vehicle casualties. You're more sort of, well, that squadron's accumulated a lot of shock and disruption, and they've got to pull back, and well, I guess a squadron of tanks could get destroyed.
Yeah.
Maison La Patrie, or no, Le Mesne. The Death Ride of the First Hussars.
Yes.
Mesnil.
Mesnil to something or other.
Yeah, where they just drove right into an ambush.
Yeah.
And lost like 3/4 of their tanks. But anyway.
James, what are you painting? I see you working on.
Well, I am. I bought myself about almost 60 Conqueror models dwarves.
Yes, we talked about.
And I was feeling a little self-indulgent and worried that postal strikes and metal going up and the pound fall, and I won't be able to get these things anymore. So I better buy some. So I bought myself 4 shield walls of dwarves with spears, and so I'm working on them, and I'm alternating them with 1809 Austrians, and I might throw some Prussians and Russians in the mix too when I get back to assembly and gluing, just to try and mix it up instead of like over the summer was this massive slog of painting Prussians, and by the time I got the brigade done, I was just like, okay, I need a break. I don't want to paint any more Prussians. And I still have 4 battalions to go. So, and they need some more cavalry, and Napoleonic armies are very needy.
They are, absolutely.
You start putting, okay, I got a nice little force. And you go, oh, I need this. Oh, I need that. Oh, they need another gun.
That's right.
Now they need a limber. Now they need more cavalry. It's like, oh, God damn it, you guys are like cats that can, Napoleonic armies are like kitties that can see the bottom of their food dish. They just start whining. I need hussars. I can hear my Austrians already. We need hussars.
That's
Because we're
ours.
Austrians and we gotta have hussars. Like, well, yeah, you do. You do because, like, who's a good little Austrian?
Right.
Yes. And you scratch them under their helmet and they purr and,
It's slightly surreal.
But I'll show you my first Austrians. I got
Oh,
a two group formation done.
okay.
My cable is tangled here.
Oh,
You get to see all the spiders.
I'm trying to avoid motion sickness here.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't really. There we go. There we go. Because the cables are all just kind of in a bunch, then it just shoves them out of the way. But there they are.
Oh, look at them. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Against this nice.
You got a nice little backdrop there.
Yeah, from John Hillsden.
Right.
He's got a couple of freebies up on his website. And
Okay.
they print off to an 8.5 by 11, which means you got to get kind of creative with your, framing.
And what is John Hillsden?
John Hillsden.
Okay.
He's an artist.
Okay.
So, since I got the camera out, here are the dwarves.
Hello. Oh, look at that. Yeah. Yeah.
Doing here, let's get some better light.
Trust me, folks, for these who are just listening on radio, this is fascinating.
Yeah, right. Totally. Oh, there we go. White light.
Oh, yes. Nice primary color shields. Very nice.
Well, I'm going to put designs on them. That's just the
Okay.
base colors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering. I think the get there that the chieftain right there with the
Yes.
with all the great beard art going on.
Yeah. Yes. And the hem on the embroidered hems on his robe, very nice.
I'm thinking I'm gonna try and do like a wolf biting its tail for him.
Very nice.
And there's the back of his cloak, which I'm rather pleased with.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
But most of the spear carriers will just be like simple, quartering and Saxon kind of designs.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
All with comic Scottish accents.
well, that's the Harfoots, right? It's music hall Scotsmen that are dwarves.
Yeah.
So
I confess, since you and I did our last podcast, I have not gone back to the Rings of Power. I stopped watching it when the folks from Numenor won the little battle, and then the earth blew up, and I guess that's the origin story of Mordor. So yeah. So
okay,
yeah.
cool. Well, you hung in there longer than I did.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I need to go back. Yeah. So anyway, dwarves and you know what? I saw those Saxons on your Twitter feed, and I like their kind of resigned look, as their sort of heads are down, and
The Austrians, you mean?
they're Austrians. Yeah, the way they're just
Well,
sort of.
Yeah, that was the test figure.
Yeah.
I kind of picked him because he looked broody. It's a problem with the Victrix because you glue the packs on
Yeah.
and you glue the heads on, and the pack, like when Perry does, they try and get very nice flat backs so that the packs go on very well and you get a good fit.
Right.
And there's obvious places to line up the things that you're supposed to line up with belts, whereas with the Victrix they kind of don't totally line up terribly well. And so this pack was sitting a little high, and the back, the Austrian helmet's got like a back brim.
Right.
That was sort of being pushed up by his greatcoat bedroll thing. So he looks very depressed.
Mhm. Yeah.
But he's an Austrian soldier. They go, here it goes again. Cool.
Right.
Are we ever going to win one of these things?
That's right. We're 0-7 this series so far, but we'll beat the French one day.
Well, I'm reading. I'm in volume 2 of Thunder on the Danube,
Right.
and it didn't all go the French way.
No.
He's in the chapter I'm right in the middle of. it's talking about the Italian front of the 1809 campaign. And it started out very badly for the French. You know, they lost a couple of battles. They're a little too overconfident, trying to, you know, not retreat and get Napoleon mad at them. So, yeah. I mean, when they were decently handled, okay, which wasn't often. You know, the Austrian soldiers fought really hard. I mean, look at look at the fighting in Aspirin.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, the description from one eyewitness was that the village was reduced to a pile of cinders, filled with corpses.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, ooh,
Unpleasant.
then you go to the other side of the battlefield with the fighting in Essling, and these guys are they're giving it their all, but the generals couldn't organize a piss up in a brewery.
Mm.
You know, they're sort of taking, it's like they're standing around waiting their turn to attack. You know, you're outnumbering the French like 4-1. Just everybody go in.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Just go in. Yeah.
Well, except they're going in like, one brigade at a time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. I wonder if that's just a function of how hard it is to handle a large army in the horse and musket period, right? I mean, look at
some of that, and also just like very uninspired Austrian generalship.
right.
They had some good, certainly their junior commanders, like their junior officers, battalion commanders, are very dedicated, very brave.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed once they got up to brigade, division, corps, they didn't really have a division corps structure. They started getting very risk adverse. They're starting to get very too political. They're not like getting back to the Battle of Aspirin. You got Messina, who's just a lion.
Mm-hmm.
Organizing the French side of that battle, and he's running around, he's screaming, he's spitting bullets, he's leading charges, like he's directing battalions at a time and throwing guys in, and he's throwing and the fighting goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and finally on the second day, when Napoleon says, okay, we just have to get out of here, right? The bridge is broken again. We're out of ammunition. We've got to retreat, or we're going to be dead. And he says, sends a galloper, goes to Messina, and it's like, can you hold them for 2 hours? He says, 2 hours? I will hold them for 24. I won't leave. And it's like, oh, dude, calm down. It's like, this is like epic stuff.
Yeah.
And that and that's, I think that's the thing that's sort of the appeal of Napoleonic gaming, right? You had these great larger-than-life characters striding across battlefields, fantastic uniforms, fairly easy to grasp tactics, but like when you get to like a big battle, do you kind of lose the character of the Nays and the Messinas and Davout, like they just kind of become a little stand with a couple little blobs. It's like, well, he's got a command radius of 12 inches and he gets a +3 when he's attached to a brigade.
Yeah.
It's like, cool.
Yeah.
That's ooh, yeah, he's roaring like a lion.
Yeah, especially in 6 mil.
Yeah, maybe I'm asking too much. Like, that's just me, but it is, it's a problem with wargaming in general, right?
Well, yeah, that's true.
But that's what I've been up to.
Yeah, speaking of Aspirin Essling, I have on my Kindle, which I don't have in front of me right now, I have a great graphic novel called The Battle, which is about, I'm not a big graphics novel fan, but it was one of those things that the Amazon algorithm recommended to me, and it's about Aspirin Essling.
Huh.
And it follows a French cavalry officer who ends up being seconded to Napoleon as a courier. And
okay, so he gets scallop all over the place.
Yeah, and I've only read the first 2 volumes. I haven't pulled the trigger yet on ordering the 3rd installment. There's 3 volumes, but it's Kindle,
Oh
so
my
it's not that expensive. And I wish I could remember the name of the author, but I will put it in the show notes because it's pretty gripping stuff. In terms of painting from me, the lighting here is really, really crappy. So
It is.
Yeah.
What? That's.
So these are 2.
Oh, okay.
They're 2 Paul Hicks warlord figures from a battalion that our friend Mike gave us.
Okay, for your
Yeah, Mike Barrett.
Fenian Rebellion.
Yeah,
trade
Fenian Rebellion, alt Civil War. So they're British. I think they're Crimean War because they have
Probably.
backpacks with mess kits and and then they have kind of like lots of Napoleonic frogging on their tunics and funny little.
Yeah, I know. Probably a uniform specialist could
Yeah.
explain to us the changes between the Crimea and the 1860s, but
I don't care really.
close enough to me.
I just know they're wearing the little Glengarries, little pillbox hats with the pom-poms, and that to me that says 1860s.
Yeah, they could be if they look like they could be changing the guard at Fort Henry.
Yeah,
Then
exactly.
which if anyone comes to Ontario, go visit Fort Henry during the summer and watch the Fort Henry Guard do their thing. It's super cool.
It is. There's also a great craft beer festival there the last week of August.
Except the Fort Henry Guard won't be marching through the middle of it.
No, but you get to sit in the lawn and
well, okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm working on right now. And then I have a bunch of Victrix Roman auxilia that are assembled, and I'm start painting them, and that wasn't that hard to assemble. I was assembling them last week while I was watching episode 4 of The Peripheral. You've been watching that, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is certainly in my top 4 of all-time favorite science fiction.
Yeah.
Like, which includes The Expanse, Babylon 5, and Firefly.
Wow, that's pretty high praise.
Yeah, no, it's really good. What's a William Gibson novel, right? So,
Yeah.
And William Gibson is, if you haven't read William Gibson, listeners out in Radioland, read him. He's very insightful. His vision of the future is kind of dark and scary.
Terrifying. Yeah.
Terrifying. Yeah. But he doesn't just, I know it's proper science fiction. Like,
Yes.
He's actually looking at how, the science of things like printing and nanotech and AIs and stuff, like how that will impact us.
Yeah, and because it's near future and he's really analytical, I don't think anything, if you look at his earlier fiction, nothing he's imagined has not come to pass.
Yeah.
Like he was one of the first cyberpunk SF writers of the early 1990s.
He kind of started cyberpunk.
Yeah, pretty Neuromancer, I think would be the. Anyway, my wife, who's a huge William Gibson fan, likes The Peripheral. She found it very, very dark, and she faults it a little bit for drifting away from the book, but it's very, very well done. My only complaint is that they use, it's very, very violent, and maybe more so than it has to be. But anyway, it's
and that's kind of keeping the tempo of a streaming show going. You gotta have a bit of action every episode, right?
Yeah.
People interested.
Highly recommended, and it was great TV to put Roman Auxilia together while watching.
Very good. Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about something that is dear to our hearts because it involves Bavarians
Ooh,
It involves guys,
Prost.
lederhosen.
Start dancing.
It involves Tyrolean goats
Yes.
and Austrians. We are talking about the Alps Aflame Kickstarter from Lucas Luber of Piano Wargames.
Yeah, gorgeous, gorgeous designer.
Yeah, absolutely. I have backed it.
Oh, very good. Good for you.
I'm
So-
all in for all the STLs. Yeah.
Okay, so okay, because I kind of looked at it. I mean, I
Yep.
didn't watch the video because I had, I was at work and had a crappy connection, as I do.
Right.
And so, yeah, I wasn't sure, like, sort of how, like, I guess it would explain to you sort of, okay, you've backed for $20. This is what you get, or you're
Yeah.
back for $60. This is what you get.
Yeah, something like that. So it's like any other Kickstarter. It's in, I guess it's in tiers or, levels, pledge levels. And there are, different levels of backing. So you can choose whether you want the STL files, or you can choose whether you want the lead files. You can choose if you just want the lead figures vice the STL files, if you want to print them, and then you decide which ones you want. So I chose the tier for where you basically just get all the STL files. So that includes all the Tyroleans, all of the Austrians, all of the Bavarians, plus the goats.
Yay, goats!
Goats, cattles.
Goats are fun, and the pack of Tyrolean civilians I just thought was really cute.
Yeah, I kind of thought you'd like them. I don't know if I'll ever print them all, but I think between the two of us, I think we could have fun printing them. And then you just basically, now there is a school of thought with Kickstarters that you just back them at the lowest possible level. And like you just generally say, yeah, I'm going to back it for $1. And then if the guy makes his target, then you can come in. If it looks like he's going to make his target, you can come in later on and but it's a way of sort of showing support. But in this case, just to give an example of how a Kickstarter works, he has that like that €1 pledge where you just basically, you're just putting your money behind it and saying, I think this is a great idea. Good luck with it. You don't actually get anything, but you can upgrade your pledge later on.
Okay.
You can get just the Bavarian STL files, the Austrian STL files, the Tyrolean files, the Danube campaign, which is Austrian and Bavarian kingdom, plus certain casualty and personality. And then the Alps Aflame starter set, which is metal, which gives you 12 sets of metal miniatures. So you're not getting a lot of figures, but you're getting some. And it's really, I think it's just showing the way that we've talked about this on the podcast before about how more and more the tendency is for designers to put the bulk of their work into STL files, and then
well, it's nice that Lucas is doing both.
Yes, yeah.
So for like, if say I didn't have friends willing to print for me, I would be forced to buy the metal.
Yeah.
But it's nice that there's that option. And I did look, and as his previous Kickstarters are still available, like, well, they're not Kickstarters anymore, but that were launched under Kickstarter, they're available on the store.
Right.
He's got a very nice line of Württemberg troops, which, if you're doing the 1809 campaign, are very important.
Yeah.
Württemberg Light Brigade performed very heroically in the opening stages of the campaign, especially at the Battle of Egnal. A lot of storming a bridge and taking a castle, and no, it's epic stuff. And they look really cool. But yeah, so because that's the things, like sometimes it's like, oh, the Kickstarter, and if you don't back the Kickstarter and you hear about it later, or you just go, oh, well, I just want like a couple of figures. It's like, well, sorry, you can't. Only the people who back the Kickstarter get it. It's like, well, but
Yeah, and that's, I don't know how common that is. In my experience, most vendors will put their stuff on their store. The advantage of a Kickstarter is that you get, you kind of, it's one-stop shopping. If you want to put a fair bit of money down, you can get pretty much everything in a range, assuming that it comes to fruition, right?
Well, and certainly like his Bavarian list looks very complete. The Tyroleans seem very complete. Another bunch of angry peasants. So I don't know how completeness is. And the Austrians are looking pretty good too for the 1809 campaign. I mean, yeah, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of cavalry he could add. But
Yeah.
I mean, I just saw dragoons and chevalier. And my feeling is always, it's an Austrian army without hussars. But yeah. I think I saw something in verbiage that he was going to do hussars, so maybe there will be hussars coming.
There you go.
We can only hope, because then I will get you to print some hussars. And
and the scale of the the Tyrolean rebellion is such that it's perfect for you don't need hussars necessarily, or cuirassier or whatever. You can just print, you could just print or paint a dozen metal figures, or as plastic resin figures, and you've got enough for a skirmish, right?
Well, I'm thinking like in the Danube Valley, not just the Tyrol.
Oh, right.
I've got all my Austrian regulars,
right?
Who, they were kind of following the Tyrolean rebels. They, like, the Tyroleans did most of the fighting, chasing the Bavarians out, and then there were some engagement. There were some engagements with quite mixed forces of Tyroleans, Austrian regulars, Austrian Landwehr. So, but when I do the Danube Valley, then I need hussars,
of course.
But that's when I also get you to print a 3rd Brigade of Bavarians.
Yeah, I may have to get myself another printer for Christmas. I had to a Deep Six one that just was not performing, and it just drove me crazy.
Here.
Well, it was just, but oddly, my basic Elegoo Mars 2 printer is just a star. It's
good.
Yeah, it's just I don't have a lot of time to access it now, but that will change. So that's kind of what I've been doing as far as painting and shopping. Kind of excited about the Piano War Games Kickstarter. So I'll put a link to that.
Yeah.
Just one more thing before we leave what is fated to become the Canadian Napoleonic War Game podcast.
Well, it's something we're kind of interested in right now.
Something we're both interested in, for sure.
I mean, if we'd done this like a couple of years back, it would have been all World War II.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and probably will.
Or before that, I would have been in Afghanistan. There were a few years there where I was all about ancient Rome, man.
That's right, and you were Mr. Colonial for a long time too. Yeah, Northwest Frontier. Yeah. And
those Romans and Northwest Frontier they were pre-blog. So that's like 11, 12 years ago now.
Yeah. Hey, that reminds me, I was a sort of subtopic. Have you been, you're more diligent about blogging right now than I am. Have you been putting more effort into it since the rumors of Twitter's demise, or is it about the same level of effort?
Same. Like when I complete something, I take some finished pictures and put them up. When I have a game, I put them up. Like I had a nice sharp practice game a couple of weeks ago, which you can kind of see behind me, the ruins of the terrain as things have pushed back, because I sort of had vague idea. I left it set up because I had vague ideas. This is kind of an interesting scenario. I'd like to play it again solo. But of course never did. And I had to, like that one, we're just having so much fun. I didn't take many pictures. So after the next morning, I reset things up and, staged some shots of critical moments so I could have a bit of a better pictorial narrative. But sadly, Hans and Franz, they were just kind of spectators, so I didn't really get them. I guess I could have had them just sitting there watching and commenting. But my super expensive Bavarian Schützen formation, with the cloud, with the +3 leader and everything, they came on last. And I used some 4 command cards to get an extra activation, push them up into a wood where they could support the the Fusiliers are on one side firefighting with the Russians, and then the Chevaux Légers were kind of squaring off and making angry eyes at the Russian Uhlans. And it's like, okay, well, get them up in the woods and they can, they can shoot up the Uhlans or they can shoot up the Russian Jaegers. And then it's like, just stuff happened. And they just kind of like, oh, this is cool. But boy, we look pretty. So the whole battle, the whole, like the unit of the match was my cheap ass plastic hat light company formation of Bavarians. They came on first. I pushed them up, then they just delivered some horribly devastating volleys onto the Russian Grenadiers, and just the shock just kept piling up on Patrick, and he just couldn't do it. He couldn't get the shock off fast enough, and they ran, and and shock is a killer in sharp practice.
Yeah. It's always those grunt units that deliver, right? What's that line from Henry V? We are but warriors for the working day. Yeah,
that's right.
There you go.
That's right. We could play the fanfare for the common man from Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I like it. Before we leave,
and the other irony I want to point out, though, before we get into our closing, is I set up this great big table, and
yes,
we fight on half of it.
Of course, right.
Our deployment, just the way our deployment points lined up at one end of the table, and so half the table just sat there looking pretty. Yeah. So anyway, Wargamer problems, right?
Wargamer problems. Yeah.
Nice problems to have.
We talked, as I said, we've talked a lot tonight about Napoleonics. There is something we can talk about in a very limited OPSEC-y sort of way, which is you and I are both in a Kriegspiel.
Yes.
Run by one of our listeners, Wendy DeWolf. Hey, Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
We are not going to say much about it, except that it is set in Germany in 1805. 1806. 1806. That's right. Yes.
1806 campaign.
That's right. Sorry. The Grand Army is chasing the Prussians around, or vice versa.
Yes, there is a lot of running around in the dark, isn't it?
There's a lot of running around in the dark. It's a cracking good Kriegspiel. It's a multi-week play by email Kriegspiel, and Wendy is doing an amazing job of umpiring it.
Yeah, and just the learning curve, of it's like, oh, I want to just move, and she says, okay, well, you got to line up, once you line up all your divisions, like these guys they're going to still be in town.
Yeah.
By the end of the day. It's like, oh, right. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, trying to move horrors along a very simple road network is challenging.
Yeah, you kind of start understanding why some of the board games have stacking limitations, and you can only move so many guys down the road at a time.
Yeah.
And of course, at the same time as playing this, I'm reading Grouchy's Waterloo and Thunder on the Danube, and getting into all the what did Napoleon know, and the fog of war they're trying to make decisions in, and just going, this is what they're doing, they're going to be there, and and the learning curve amongst the players is where you're like, okay, what's going on with this other guy? Like on my team, I'm not hearing from him. Has he been crushed? Am I about to have all kinds of bad people attacking me? Like, what? Just where the hell is he? you know, if I want to support them, where should I go? You
Yeah,
know, and then, you know, I think, you know, a couple of turns into the game, then it's like getting more reports back, because, you know, we're all kind of learning that we really should send memos to each other. You know, even if it's not orders or receiving orders or reports to our higher command, at least just FYIs. I'm
Yeah.
moving here and I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, good. Now I know.
Yeah, my boss is very, very insistent about what I'm doing, and I get angry notes if I've been out of contact for too long. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I made a comment to Wendy the one time, just sort of an offside. It's like, I suppose, you know, going for, you know, commander's intent and mission command is rather anachronistic for the, you know, for this period. But well, I guess, yeah, I guess Napoleon's army was getting into mission command. That's why the marshals are so good.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, they were yeah, provided that Napoleon took the credit when they succeeded. Yeah.
Well,
So
you know,
we're hoping to have Wendy as a guest on the podcast when this is all over. And I really can't say anything more right now about, because James and I don't even know, like I have a rough idea what side James is on, but I don't know that for sure. And I have no idea where he is on the map. The map is basically all of central Germany.
yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's
Yeah, we're playing from Magdeburg in the north
yeah,
down to Bayreuth and Würzburg in the south.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. So it's yeah, it's
And there's Leipzig.
yeah, there's Leipzig. Yeah. So
We should just maneuver so we have the Battle of Leipzig early.
yeah. So our hope is to have Wendy on the show when it's all over, and we can do
Yeah.
a big and Wendy can tell us what it was like watching this from her God's eye point of view. I'm not sure when that'll be, because I suspect this is going to go on for another month or so.
Oh, yeah.
That's my guess anyway.
Well, some turns kind of flip over a little quicker than others. I guess depends on how many engagements she has to sort out. You know, and
Yeah.
I know there have been some weeks where she's had to poke me, because I've had shit going on, and it's like, oh crap, okay. You know, I'm trying to, you know, look at the map on my phone at work and type orders back, and it's like, I think I know where I'm sending people,
Yeah.
where I'm
I have
deploying.
everything printed in a 3-ring binder that I keep close to my computer.
Oh, you're way more organized.
Well, in this case, I am, because I want to win.
Oh, I'm slacking it.
As far as future guests go, we have a few other ideas, and we won't. James and I need to talk about future ideas, so we'll just stay tuned for future podcasts. I think that's kind of everything I want to talk about tonight. James, are we good?
Oh, we're fabulous.
We are fabulous. It's nice to be doing this again, and nice to be feeling good about it.
Yeah.
We had promised Glenn that we would find some appropriate music to play out the show, and I'm just trying to remember what we agreed on. We agreed
Bonnets over the border.
Blue Bonnets Over the Border. That's right, from the
Toronto Scottish March
from
Band.
the Toronto Scottish Regiment. Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
We chose that because Glenn's a Toronto guy, and he said he'd like the bagpipes, and the Toronto Scottish is a very distinguished Canadian regiment. So there you go. That will be our march out. James, this has been grand. Thanks very much.
All right. Well, good night to all our listeners out in Podland and our ships at sea.
Yeah, thanks for listening, folks. We're grateful for however many of you listen, and if you have any suggestions or comments, get a hold of us. We'd love to hear from you. All right. Take care. Good night, everybody.
Good night, eh?
Good night, eh?